Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for coming back to Listening In, the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society podcast. In this series, we want to give you the opportunity to listen in to some of the conversations that we are lucky enough to have every day. That is, with a variety of people and organisations all working in the field of mental health and well-being. Today, it gives me much pleasure to welcome Kat Nicholls, who is the Brand and Integrity Manager at Happiful. She's also a podcast host in her own right and a volunteer with Beat Eating Disorders. Drawing on her own mental health journey, Kat is dedicated to helping people find the right support when they need it, as well as supporting professionals reach those who need them. In our conversation, Kat generously shares her experience and expertise on how to promote yourself, your work, and your business, none of which are exactly the same thing, but of course are all so interconnected. There's such a fine balance that therapists need to be mindful of when promoting themselves that so many other business people don't. And so in our conversation, Kat and I discuss this. How does a counsellor create an online profile, find their ideal client, and create meaningful content that connects while remaining both ethically sound and yet still sounding personally authentic? Kat also helps us to understand how to stand out in an often saturated market, and how to ensure in that marketplace that our individuality and uniqueness comes across powerfully to potential clients. But first things first, what is Happiful exactly? And more to the point, what is a brand and integrity manager? I've got to get this right. Brand and integrity manager?
Yes.
For Happiful magazine. So,
well, it's just Happiful, so it's not the magazine.
I see. The Happiful brand, as it were.
Yeah.
So just start off by telling us a bit about that, Kat. What that Happiful in all senses is, and specifically what your role within that is.
Yeah, absolutely. So Happiful is kind of the umbrella term or the name for the whole company. And that was started back in 2005 when two sisters were really struggling to find the mental health support that they needed. They only really had two options back then, which was to go to their GP or to grab a phone book and go look through there and find a name and a number. But they realised they really wanted to find a way of getting to know people a bit more before working with them in that capacity. And they just decided there must be a better way. And in 2005, websites were becoming more and more prominent, and they realised, wait, we could create a website that had listings of professional counsellors and therapists. So they created that in, I think, the summer, July of 2005, the first directory, counselling directory. And then just over the years, they've really realised how many other aspects of health and well-being can benefit from that kind of a directory where you can really learn more about a professional before you start working with them. So they created hypnotherapy directory, life coach directory, nutritionist resource, and therapy directory, which is more holistic therapies and complementary things like that. And then in 2017, they wanted to bring all of these directories under one roof, essentially, and came up with the brand name Happiful.
Ah, I see.
So that's where it all kind of came together. And they also launched the magazine in 2017 as well to kind of symbolise bringing everything under one roof and to create another offering as well for people who may not be ready to work with professionals yet, or maybe don't know whether or not they want to work with a professional but are interested in mental health and wellness and want to learn more. And the magazine is that option for them to do that and to learn, read some self-help articles and find out, there is a place where I can go and find a counsellor if that's what I'm looking for, and this is where it is. So that's kind of in a nutshell, the story of how it all began and how it's evolved to where it is now.
Do you know the word that's come to my head as I've listened to you describe that is there sounds like a real generosity behind that, from first of all that recognition from their own experience about there must be an easier way to find a practitioner, and then recognising all those different elements that come from that and what might also help people in that whole broader landscape of trying to manage their own mental health. Like you say, even if it's not quite at that point where they feel they want to seek professional help, but they're just starting to dip their toes in the water of what they might be able to do. Yeah, it sounds like a real generosity behind it. How can we improve that? What else can we give? What else can we share to help people in that space?
Yeah, that's a really nice way of summing it up, actually. It did stem from that initial, they had this issue and they realised other people must have the same issue. And it's just gotten so broad now that they know more about the industries and, they work in the industries. Amy and Emma both done training in certain aspects. Amy has done some counselling training, hypnotherapy. Emma's looking down the nutrition route. So they've learned more about being professionals in those industries as well, and realizing how they can actually help professionals find the right clients as well. And it's really just about connecting those dots between matching clients up with the right professionals for them and vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely, and you're right. I should have included in that also. It's not just for the people seeking their help. There's that generous platform there to help people that are there to offer that support too. Of which I remember back in the day when I was in full-time practice, and the Counselling Directory was the very first platform that I once I'd sort of slightly discovered the digital world. I mean, I come from back in the day, like you say, when it was the yellow pages, or cards dotted around your local town, or interviews in your local newspaper, and that was advertising. And it's crazy to think of that now, isn't it? Now we're here with social media and LinkedIn and websites and everything, and podcasts and everything that goes with it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think within that as well, I guess my role as the brand and integrity manager is to make sure we keep all of those values, that generosity, and make sure we're living and breathing the values that we started the company with, making sure essentially that we're practicing what we're preaching, whether that's how we treat our employees. So I look after the kind of internal wellness team that we have and make sure all of our policies are aligned and that we're supporting employees in the best way, making sure the communication, whether we're talking to our members or talking to the public, is all coming from the same place. Making sure that I'm sharing our story as well, so that more people can find us and use us if needed to find the right professionals. And also maintaining and shaping what is called our proof policy, which is the policy where we decide who is allowed to advertise with us, depending on their qualifications, whether or not they're a member of a professional body, and things like that. Because we realise, obviously, counselling is one of the industries that's not statutory regulated yet at the moment. So anybody could technically call themselves a counsellor. So we wanted to make sure when we started the company that who we're going to allow to advertise with us is who they say they are and has got the qualifications to back it up. So our proof policy is our way of ensuring that, and that is now sitting within my role to look after that and make sure we just keep those high standards so that members of the public can feel a sense of trust and safety when they come to us.
It's exactly it, isn't it? It's public safety that you're looking after there, which of course so much of what you've just said there about your role really aligns. I can relate to that in my work with the society, of course, not just in terms of public safety, but it's interesting when I was thinking about your title, Brand and Integrity Manager, it's such an unusual title, and it really intrigued me. I was so curious about what that meant exactly. And I suppose at the society we can relate to what you describe as that integrity by how we always are very keen and very conscious for every single one of our staff members to understand that at the heart of everything we do, every conversation we have, every meeting we have, everything we write and all our output and everything we do holds key to our core values and ethos too. That was pretty much the first thing that I was taught when I came on board, all about that and how that needs to hold really fast, be really central to everything we do. So now I understand that's what your integrity is. Taking that like you say, that generosity and those ideas that created the Happiful, what you want to call it, family? I don't know, family of and make sure that integrity and those values are threaded all the way through everything. That sounds quite the job for you to have.
It is quite the job, but I'm lucky in that I've been working for Happiful for, about 13 years now. So this is my 13th year. So I've been with them for a very long time. I've been with them as they've kind of grown and created the magazine and how everything's come under one roof. So I'm in quite a unique position that I really understand how everything works. I've been there from the early days, and I've always been in the content team, so writing and creating content. And then, it was June last year, we had a bit of a restructure and thought, what are some of the strengths that I have? And I think integrity is something, not to toot my own horn or anything, but that I think I'm quite strong in and that I understand within our company. And they were just like, okay, let's make this, let's make this actually a job for you and find out what fits within it. So I've only actually been doing it for about 6 or 7 months now. So I'm still in the early days, but it's such an integral job role that I think it's nice to really formalize it and have it as something that we do day to day.
Yeah, that sounds so important, and toot your own horn as much as you like. It's lovely to know that those skills and qualities that you have are something that you can fully embody in your work. I think that's something really and lovely that's been recognised as well by your colleagues. So do you mind, Kat, is it okay if we just look, I usually do this with most of the guests that we speak to, just look back to, so for you, before Happiful, what if anything brought you into this line of work? What attracted you to doing this job that you're in now, but obviously when you first started out with Happiful? Were there any particular reasons for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd always wanted to write. That was my passion. I was always interested in writing. I studied media writing at university. I came away from that, and back then I was into music and fashion journalism, and I really wanted to be in that world. But then I got into that world. I got into working for a fashion website in London. I thought it was the dream, it was the dream come true, but I got there and just realized it wasn't what I was passionate about. I loved fashion. I loved getting dressed in the morning and making fun outfits, but it just didn't light me up. And I think I realized I needed something more. And then when I was searching for other jobs, Happiful came up. And I recognized, my past. I've struggled with my mental health in the past. I had an eating disorder in my teen years and had done a lot of work through my recovery. And I'd never thought about mental health writing, in all honesty, before then. But then when this job came up, I was like, wait a minute, that is definitely something I can write about. And luckily got the job interview and it all worked out, and the rest is history. But it did take me a while to recognize that is an area I was interested in. And then the more I've worked for the company, the more I've learned about the industry. And it's just been a bit of a calling for me, I think. And it's definitely the industry I want to stay in.
That's so lovely that you were able to almost accidentally, find that out about yourself, it sounds like.
Definitely. I'm not sure if I hadn't seen that job ad, if I would have gone into that area. I was looking, again, for more fashion work and even, I was dipping my toe into the wellness space a little bit. I was thinking about that, but then this came up and it was just perfect.
Well, I never. Yeah, I've got this thing sort of about parallel universes. I'm not saying whether I believe or disbelieve in them, but I just sort of think, somewhere there's another world where Kat didn't see that advert, and where would you be? I mean, maybe you would have found your way on that path anyway. I'm sure something, may have well happened that just sort of shone that light for you and helped you, find what it really was that was fulfilling for you, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is it. You know, when I speak to people now and I talk about the work that I'm in, and that I've been with a company for 13 years, which is quite rare. It's not super common. And you know, people are like, oh wow, you've been there for that long. Like, what? You know, why have you been there? It's like, well, first of all, it is a very fulfilling role, but obviously the company really look after their employees, and again, the job that I'm in now is because they recognised qualities and they were able to change my job role to something that they could see me really progressing in. And I think that's quite rare as well, for a company to really recognise something in their employees and be able to make those changes for them.
Do you mind me asking, and please say if not, but do you think your own experiences from when you were younger and your own experiences of whatever support you received then as well, never mind everything that you went through on a personal level, do you feel that still informs some of the work that you do at Happiful now? Are you able to draw on that, I suppose I'm asking?
100%, because I've definitely been on that other end of needing mental health support and how I got it. And, you know, back then it was through the NHS, it was through CAMS. But I have used the directory myself in more recent years for other issues, things like anxiety, and being able to be on that side of it really gives you a unique perspective to be able to support professionals as well, and to say, like, I've been on this other side looking as a client. These are the things I've connected with, and these are the things we think other people might connect with. And just learning more about what an impact it can have as well. So being able to recover from my eating disorder with that professional help, and that was integral for those kinds of conditions, is so needed. Just knowing that impact and how my life has changed for the better hugely, it does make me very, very passionate about it. And I do also volunteer for BEAT, the eating disorder charity, outside of work as well, just as another way of trying to use that lived experience again for good, I guess, and finding a way to use that. So I would say it's definitely informed a lot of my career.
Yeah, it's amazing how we can take these things and it's not about leaving it behind, is it? There are aspects, of course, we leave behind and move on from, and we need to, but there are other aspects of going through that type of experience that we keep with us and that inform us as we go on through life. I think that's a lovely thing to be able to do, and to give back to a charity like BEAT is fabulous. Yeah. Okay, now you mentioned there that partly because of your own experience, you are able to talk to professionals and say, this is what helped me. This is what I noticed, this is what I was looking for. And I know that we both agreed a really helpful part of this conversation for our listeners would be to talk about that aspect of being a practitioner that is really important, particularly for those obviously in private practice, but isn't really always covered well in training. And we will all, I'm sure many of us know that work in this profession, of people that we trained with who we know could have been amazing practitioners, but they fell at the hurdle of being able to set up a business, and understanding how to promote yourself. And again, as we've already alluded to, in this world, ever-changing world of online world, and ways to be able to advertise in that. And actually, I should say as well, while keeping our integrity and our professionalism at the heart of it. So being careful about confidentiality, being careful about our own footprint online, personal versus professional. There's so much, isn't there, to reconcile and balance as we move into that sphere of promoting our work. So, I mean, it's a really big conversation, I know. There's so much to cover. So I'm just going to sort of leave that little introduction and just sort of hand over to you, I think, that, is where does somebody start? Maybe if we took it from the basis of somebody's just come out of training and qualifying, They've just graduated, they're just looking, they've decided perhaps they still have some work in a placement or something like that, or have got a little bit of paid work somewhere, but ultimately they want to set up in private practice. I mean, where does somebody start and set themselves apart from all the other practitioners in their area too?
Yeah, no, it's a great question and a great conversation to have as well, because you're right, it's not necessarily covered in the training, and a lot of people do come out thinking, oh gosh, where do I even start? And I do think it starts, if you can, getting some kind of online presence at the beginning is great, because online presences like websites, or if it is a directory profile, if you do join a directory, or a professional body profile, if you're with a professional body, those online presences, they will gain more and more what we call SEO juice. So search engine optimization, more traffic and things like that over time. So the longer your website is online, the better, really. Mm-hmm. So I guess that would be my first little tip, would be to, if you can, try and establish an online presence as early as possible, because the longer you have that up there, the longer, the algorithms will be able to find you for, and that will do really well. So that's also quite an quote unquote easy way to start as well, because there are lots of places where you can set up a website, usually relatively affordably, and it can just get you out there, and you're not super restricted to location. But of course, that will also depend on whether or not you want to see people in person, or if you're wanting to see people online as well. So as you said, there's so many different things to look at, especially for the counselling industry, and how much you share of yourself and how much you don't share, what you talk about in terms of confidentiality. It is incredibly tricky, but I think being able to get that online presence can give you that little step up. Places like Counselling Directory is great if you are a member of a professional body and you just want that extra presence. That is kind of what we do. Our website has been around since 2005, so 26, just 21 years nearly. And that's got a lot of SEO juice. So if your website is brand new and the algorithms haven't found it just yet, setting yourself up somewhere established that's been around for 20 plus years is going to really benefit you.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, absolutely. I really understand that. So somebody's sat there and they're thinking, I can set up Facebook profiles and LinkedIn and I can build a website, etc. But actually what you're saying is, if you're looking for something that's already well established that you can put your profile on, then that's going to gain the traction, because there's already that group of users that go to something like Counselling or Hypnotherapy Directory, for example.
Yeah, exactly that. It's almost like you're piggybacking off of their establishment.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it like that at all. You can tell how old I am. And just out of interest, you mentioned SEO, so search engine optimization. I know that changes, they're always changing the parameters for that, aren't they? And again, for somebody that doesn't necessarily have that understanding of all of that stuff and how it keeps changing, that can be quite a lot to try and work out. Obviously, you can pay somebody to do that for you, but if we come back to your original point of getting that little footprint online as quickly as possible, do you know whether it's about having something weighty? I don't know how else to describe it. So something very meaningful with your name attached to it. Or is there a difference between having just lots of mentions in lots of different places? So I'm thinking the difference between somebody that may update their Facebook page regularly with content about their work or sharing articles or whatever, or having a Facebook page they don't update much, a profile on Counselling Directory, not quite a website yet. They might have set up a little LinkedIn profile. Is there a difference between lots of, I suppose I'm talking like lots of little fingerprints versus one big, go-to footprint? Is there a difference in those two things?
That is a really good question. I think in terms of SEO, as you said, the parameters change all the time. The rules change all the time. And for some counsellors, they find that interesting and they want to learn more about it and they want to get involved in that. But if you don't, I think my really, really back to basics with it is try to think about what a potential client might be searching for in a search engine.
Okay.
What kind of questions might they be asking? So it could be, do I need a relationship coach? Do I need to talk to someone about anxiety? All these little kind of questions, and think about how you can answer those questions wherever that may be. That might be, I would say, focus on a website and get that kind of up and running and make that as great as it can be. Creating content that answers those questions. Make sure you're revealing what the process is going to be, so somebody coming across it understands. And then you can get those little fingerprints out, but all coming back to that main website. So have a home, and then dot your fingerprints around it.
Yeah, that makes real sense. I really appreciate your answer, because I wasn't sure whether that was like a really ridiculous question for me to ask. You were very kind in being so patient and answering that. So actually what you're saying is having your own website is like a base that's got all that information, and where you can express yourself as a person and as a therapist, get your own personality and approaches across, is really important. And like you say, all those other little sort of satellites around it just then can filter back to that.
Yeah, and then if a website seems too big at the moment, because I do understand also that can be quite daunting, a profile. So whether it is a profile on Counselling Directory, profile with the NCPS, whatever professional body you're with, just make that one place your kind of home. Make sure you've got everything on there. You're answering those SEO questions, those things that clients might be asking. And again, if you're using social media, link back to your profile. Make sure people always come back to there to find out more about you. So just to say, for those who don't want to set up a website immediately, because I do know some counsellors who don't have websites and are still, work very, well, are very successful in what they do. But for them, it's just all about having that one home space, wherever that is for you.
Yeah, I understand. And can you give us, Kat, any more insight into what it is that we know the public are looking for? I remember back in the day, it was a long time ago, I think I was probably one of the sort of first people to go on Counselling and Hypnotherapy Directory back in the day. And I remember when they started doing those things where you had the pie chart, and it was where people were coming from that were looking at your profile, so in geographical sense, and also sort of like the most popular search terms. Whether that was relationships, depression, anxiety, and then the next month that might have all sort of slightly chopped around a bit. And I always found that really, really interesting and helpful. Now, I appreciate that was a long time ago. Things may be a bit different in terms of those insights now. But do you have any sense that, when somebody is seeking help, and we always need to remember they're feeling vulnerable, potentially, they may well not know what they're looking for. All they know is that they're feeling pretty dreadful, and they go to Google or other search engines are available and tap something in. Do we know what it is that they're mostly writing, what they're asking in that search?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do still have those insights in our area as well. So we probably added more since then. I'm sure there's quite a lot in there. And I think what we notice is that users of our website really connect with people. So they really want to have that human touch. They really want to understand a person's voice. So that's something we always say, like, make sure when you are writing your profile, or if you are writing any articles or creating any other content, you're really using your voice, because that's the voice they're going to speak to in the therapy room if they actually do contact you. So finding out what it is you're really passionate about and really focusing in on that, making sure you're talking about the areas of expertise you have. And we find, obviously, people look for all different types of things, but what they really want is someone who's going to be open and non-judgmental. And, the feedback we have sometimes is that people contact a counsellor and they don't get back to them. And sometimes that can put people off. So a very, very simple thing, but making sure all your communications are set up correctly as well, making sure that you're checking your emails, you're replying to them, you've got an answer phone message if you've got a phone and somebody calls when you're not available. Obviously, you're not working 24/7, so you're not always going to be able to be responsive. And then, we can definitely see in terms of our insights what areas are being looked at more, what kind of issues people are coming up with. It used to be anxiety was the top one. It was the thing that most people were asking about and curious about. Now it seems to be relationships, ADHD and neurodiversity are kind of the top things that people are searching for. And I think you can look to the wider context there as well and see where the waiting lists are on NHS and see where people are possibly searching for private therapists instead.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. And that responsiveness that you were talking about, again, I think sometimes, as much as I think maybe we don't want to admit it sometimes, but again, particularly if you are just keen to promote yourself and your business and attract clients, we can get carried away with I hope this is going to make sense, with what we're trying to sell versus what people want from us. And those are sometimes two slightly different things, aren't they? And I think it's really important when you're doing anything online in terms of directories or websites or social media or whatever, just to pause and step into the shoes of that potential client. And I think more than anything is recognise that how many times has somebody done this search and not followed it up? How many, if I think back over my time as a practitioner, the amount of people that will call to book an initial, consultation, and they come along and, it's that why now question. And they say, I've been coming and looking at your website for the last 2 years, and now I'm taking that step. So I think we need to be really mindful of just how hard that is for people to reach out. And even if you can't get back to somebody very quickly, then you can always just put that in your email footer, can't you? Or on your voicemail. You can manage those expectations and say, due to a busy client or whatever that might be, I aim to respond within, and even if you said a week, at least people know, rather than it just being that silence. I think that's so important.
Yeah, it is. It is that recognising that just taking that first step to contact a counsellor is incredibly nerve-wracking. Again, as I mentioned, I used the directory a couple of years ago to help with something. And even me, I've worked at the company for a decade and I was still really nervous about making that first, doing that first inquiry and actually reaching out to somebody and making that connection. And, I was very fortunate that the first person I contacted got back to me straight away. And if it's helpful as well, some of the steps I took before I made that contact was obviously searching for the issue that I was dealing with. I was kind of searching for somebody who I thought could relate to me as well. So personally, I was looking for somebody who maybe was of a similar age, maybe would understand the certain dynamics that I was dealing with. I looked on their social media profiles because I was interested to see, who are they outside of the counselling work that they've discussed in their profile, which is why social media can be a really positive thing to have for a counsellor, just because it just shows a bit more of who you are. And I found that helpful to understand, I wanted to know, do my values kind of align with this person that I'm going to be talking to? And that was one way I was able to do it. And then, of course, it was making that contact and having that initial phone call, making sure I felt a rapport on the phone call, and then feeling confident and taking it forward and understanding what the process was going to look like as well. I always say for counsellors, there's a lot of mystery for clients when it comes to making that first step. So anything you can do to remove some of that mystery is so important. So if that's saying, right, when you reach out to me, this is what's going to happen. We can arrange an introductory call. It will be this long. We'll discuss this and this. Setting expectations, again, for clients so they know what will probably happen if they do reach out to someone. And that just makes such a big difference.
That's so, it's funny actually that you just used that word, because I was going to say, so it sounds like that what you at Happiful and your colleagues there will often suggest then is, I suppose it is, again, it's about relationship, isn't it? That word that's so important in this profession. And again, reminding people that as soon as they land on their directory profile, as soon as a member of the public lands on your directory profile or lands on your website, that's like, that's their first impression. And that, I think people forget, is actually where the relationship is starting. And again, how quickly or not and how clearly or not you respond to their first phone call or their first email, that's all the beginning of that relationship. It's not just when you're sat in the room or when you've made that diary booking with that person. So it's all that relational stuff, isn't it? And what you would want and what we would expect and want for ourselves and our loved ones,
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. And I'd not thought of it in that way, but that is absolutely it. It is starting that relationship off on a good foot, making sure. And again, really simple things like if you have got a website, making sure it works in the way that it should. Do the links work? If somebody goes to email you through your website, is that working for you? If somebody, are the pictures up to date? Is that the person they're going to possibly see at the other end of whether it's a Zoom call or if it's in the therapy room? Or do you look completely different to that? Is there, are there typos? Have you got the spelling correct? These are all really simple little things. But if you just get a friend, get a family member just to go through your website and just say like, yep, everything works as I would expect it to work. And that's great, because those, again, it's just about removing barriers to entry, because everything like that, if you go onto a website and you're like, oh, I want to learn more about that, you click on a link and it doesn't work, that can be enough for some clients to be like, oh, okay, now I'm going to find somebody else.
Absolutely. And I always think, does it work on a laptop and a mobile? Because I think that's somewhere, sometimes you end up, don't you, and I'm not just talking obviously about counselling, but you end up on your mobile on a website and it's so all over the place, and it's like, okay, no, so, just realising that those two things can work slightly differently, and you need to make sure that it all works. It's really interesting, Kat, hearing you talk about your own more recent search for a therapist. And again, it was such a clear reminder of, again, the speed and the availability of us to find something out online. So again, it's not just, for anybody that remembers flicking through the days, the yellow pages or whatever, finding it and reading it and then you call them or whatever, that actually, within seconds, you can have looked at their directory profile, followed through to their website, got a sense of their name, seen what they look like, so then tap it in again and find. It's really interesting. You said, I looked at their social media. I searched that out. So again, that prospective clients aren't just landing on one place to look at who you are and what you're doing, but they're then doing potentially lots of searches and finding you everywhere in that, which I suppose takes us back to what we were saying earlier about, having one big home base and then lots of little other satellites all around that where people can go. But it's about keeping that all cohesive, I suppose. Not saying one thing somewhere and something completely different somewhere else that perhaps makes people second guess you, maybe. And again, I suppose a lot of that is just keeping it updated, checking everything is all in line, checking everything matches.
Exactly, and it is about coming back to it, because it's so easy to create these things when you first for example, join directory and think, amazing, I'm going to create my profile and now I'm just going to leave it and let the clients come. And obviously sometimes that does work, but you need to keep coming back to it. Every time you've done another training or you've realized this is an area I really want to specialize in, making sure that's updated and just checking in every now and then, like maybe every season, just be like, okay, is this up to date with who I am right now in my practice and what I do? And obviously understanding as well that all clients are going to look at this differently. So obviously I explained my experience and what I looked at. Other clients might look for different things. So taking a minute to think about, who are the clients I want to be reaching out to and talking to, and where are they? So I've spoken to some counsellors who work more with like older people in the later stages of life, and they're not on TikTok, they're not on Instagram. It's like, okay, so find out where do they, if they're not online, are there local community areas where you can maybe talk about your work, or are there talks that you can do at events that they might be attending? So it's really about understanding who the client is that you want to work with or that you most work with in your practice, and figuring out, okay, basically where do they hang out, whether that's online or in person, and finding ways to bridge that gap between them and you.
That's such a good point, and that's all still so valid, isn't it? We've talked such a lot about online, but actually we may not always find our clients online. I used to specialise very early on in my career in pregnancy and childbirth. And I was lucky enough to have a health visitor in my local community that enabled me to come along and, have a chat at antenatal clinics and things like that, there's always different ways that you can get yourself out there, if, like you say, particularly if your demographic isn't necessarily online. And so I suppose there's also something in, and this is something that we hear a lot of, and that is how sometimes very similar many practitioners' websites or profiles are. They'll talk a bit about who they are, qualifications, training, memberships, which of course is all really important, but very often to somebody that doesn't understand these things, it doesn't mean a great deal. And then it's what I work with, and there's all these general anxiety and depression and panic attacks and phobias and all these things, relationships. What helps somebody then elevate their presence that stands out, or helps them at least stand out above everybody else? And I appreciate some of those points we may have slightly touched on already about making it much more personal about you, but is there any more insight you can give us about that, Kat?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an interesting debate I've had with counsellors actually about whether or not to niche and whether or not to really focus in on a specific area or to be a bit more of a generalist. And I've honestly heard from both camps. I've heard from people who are more generalist and they say that works for them and they get the right clients. And then I hear people saying that didn't work for them. Being too general meant nobody knew if they were the right person, and they found it helpful for them to niche down into one specific area. As you said earlier on in your career, pregnancy and childbirth was an area. So it really, really depends. And I guess my advice there would be to experiment. If you're finding the generalist approach isn't working, maybe try niching down. You can always go back. That's the great thing about being able to update your spaces online, as you can change when you need to. But experiment with it and see if maybe drilling down to something more specific, you might have a smaller pool of clients, but you might be reaching the right pool of clients for you. And they might find, this person's speaking about exactly what I want to look at. And that's really powerful when you can answer a really specific question, or you can be that answer for somebody. That can be incredibly powerful for somebody. So that would be a bit of a tip there, would be experiment with niching. And then again, it's really bringing it about to using your voice and your experiences. There are lots and lots of different practitioners out there, a lot who probably work in the same field as you, but none will have your lived experience of the clients you've worked with, the life you've led, and what's brought you to the profession. And again, I'd be interested to ask you actually about this, but I know there's a bit of debate about how much of yourself to share.
I was literally just going to say the same to you. Yeah.
So, and again, I've heard mixed theories on that. So that really will depend on your training, I imagine.
I honestly think, yes, training and approach, I suppose. So somebody that practices in CBT may be very different to somebody that's a psychodynamic counsellor or psychoanalyst. And of course, everything in between. I have a sense that practitioners are perhaps more likely now to give a little bit of themselves. You're so right. You know, it's very much debated. I suppose you're just always finding that line, aren't you, of it's one thing saying this has brought me here, these are my experiences that have brought me here perhaps, versus this is what I'm going through now, of course, you know. And I know that may sound a really silly thing to say, but again, we know sometimes that sort of thing goes on. It's never about overshadowing your client. And actually, personally, I sort of think it's never about going, oh my goodness, me too. But again, where is that line? That's because, you know, and let's face it, some clients outright ask. They can say, have you experienced this? Do you have children? You know, or have you gone through a divorce or a separation? It could be really, you know, quite, and again, especially as a newly qualified practitioner, well, do I disclose that? Do I not disclose that? It's difficult. It's what supervision's there for a lot of the time, you know, part of that. So you're so right. That's a very clumsy answer to your question, because again, to a certain degree, there's no right or wrong, is there? But there's certainly some people that would certainly advocate, I think, sharing more about themselves than others. And I think they would say they feel there's an authenticity in that. Whereas, of course, I'm sure other people would say, well, actually, that's a bit too much of yourself. But it's
really about finding what feels right for you.
Yeah, I think so.
Comfortable with, because if you don't feel comfortable disclosing certain things, absolutely don't, because your safety and, you know, your well-being matters just as much as well. So
yeah, and you don't know sometimes what may feel, you know, we all know about ruptures that can happen in a therapeutic relationship, and of course in an ideal world they you know, you work through those and you come to a positive conclusion towards the end of your work with somebody. But actually, if the worst happened and there's a rupture and then somebody has gone off and left that and has a great deal of information about you also, what are they then going to do with that information about you? What are they going to tell other people?
That's so true. So it may even not be about sharing your lived experiences, but maybe, again, it's your values and your approach to how you work. So you might not want to talk about your own personal history, but you could talk about, this is the approach I take with my clients, you know, whether it's a personalized, you know, approach, or, you know, I've learned from these teachings and these approaches, and this is what I look to help clients understand the kind of relationship you're going to have. And you know, if you want to talk about your values and your beliefs as well, sometimes that can be a nice way without going too deep into your personal history, just to let people get a bit of a sense of who you are and whether or not you'll be the right fit.
I always think as well, I don't know how this would sound to people. I think I take this from back in the day when I remember reading about, is it Milton Erickson, who's in the hypnotherapy world, or was. And I'm sure I'm going to get this wrong. But he used to talk about, was it my friend John or something, or my brother John? And his was very much about, you can give those insights, but they don't have to be about yourself. You can assign them to some other imaginary person that, you know, probably doesn't even exist, but you're still able to share some lived insight into something without necessarily having to say, this happened to me. You know, it could be, I used to know somebody, or a relative or an old friend of mine, and yet you could still share your story through that, and maybe that keeps it a little bit safer and a bit cleaner, I don't know. But again, there's, you know, it's all down to preference, isn't it?
It is, and there are so many just different ways. I think that the important takeaway really is that a client wants to wants to know a little bit about who you are and how the relationship is going to be before they reach out. So however you can find your ways of doing that, it just helps, again, take away that mystery and helps people understand this is who I'm going to be speaking to. And don't have any surprises. Don't come to the therapy room and then completely taken aback by the approach, because they've read a bit more or understand a bit more about what you do.
Just out of interest, you've just also made me think. So sometimes I suppose it's also, isn't it? It's not necessarily what you say, but the way you're saying it. So it is the language you're using, the vocabulary you choose, the tone you're using. Is it really friendly and quite casual, or do you choose to go, really very professional? And again, everything. Is there something to be said for that as well, I suppose, in getting who you are across?
Absolutely. And I think it's incredibly important to talk about this now in an age of AI as well. And people may be turning to AI to create content, which can absolutely have its pros. It can be a great way of fine tuning things or spell checking, or a tool to give you some ideas for things. But when you use something like an AI voice to create your content, whether that's a written article, a social media post, or a profile listing, something like that, it then takes away from your voice, because it's this quite generic, it might talk about things in very jargony ways. And again, my tip is always to speak in your own voice and actually try speaking it aloud. So try reading through your profile out loud. Does it flow? Does it sound like the way you would talk to a client? Again, there will be a sense of professionalism then, because you're not chatting to your mate. You are speaking to a potential client. And how is that coming across? And are you using terms that they're going to understand? Or are you using really complex words that they might not have a clue what they mean? And yeah, so that's definitely one of my tips, is to use your own voice. If AI helps you kind of with some of that, definitely feel free to do that. But then read it out loud, speak it out loud to make sure it sounds like you and it flows.
Yeah, make sure it feels like how you would say it. And I know we're fast running out of time, so I'm really sorry to throw this one right in at the end at you, but I'm really conscious we've talked a lot about, I don't know, there's probably a proper word for this that I don't know, but sort of the static versions, or, i.e. profiles, a photo, a summary of who you are, a list of the things you do and your training that we would have on a website or whatever. But what about something more active, like videos, online videos, YouTube? Again, you mentioned TikTok earlier. Where does that sit within this, Kat? Sorry to ask you this, right? Because again, I appreciate it's probably a really big topic, but...
No, I'm glad you've mentioned it, actually. It's definitely one of the things I was thinking to mention, because as I said earlier, creating content is a way of taking away some of the mystery of who you are and how you work. And written work can do that amazingly, but audio, whether it's through a podcast, being a guest on podcasts, or creating your own, and video content, it takes that mystery away even more. People can see how you speak, they can hear your voice, and that means they can literally visualize themselves in a therapy room with you, because they've seen how you speak. They've seen how you converse with somebody in a certain setting, and that just takes away that mystery. So I do think I totally respect and understand that not everyone will want to go down that route. It's not for everybody, and that's absolutely fine. You don't have to do it to have a successful counselling practice at all. But for some people, it can just add an extra dimension to who they are and take away a little bit more of that mystery for the client, so they can connect even deeper.
Oh, that's really helpful. And I love the way that you understand, it isn't always for everybody. And I think it's always really reassuring to remind people that just because the world makes you feel you need to be, dropping little clips on TikTok, or, having an Instagram account with beautiful pictures or whatever, that again, if that isn't who you are, you don't have to do that. Just find, like you said earlier, find out, what you can do and do well, and how you can reach those people. It doesn't always have to be in those ways. That's really helpful, and I'm sure really reassuring for people, especially those that aren't so tech-minded, a bit like my good self. So
Exactly.
Kat, thank you so much. Is there anything else or anywhere you can signpost people to just before we finish? Obviously, I can put some links in the show notes, but anything that comes to mind, or just point them towards Happiful and let them run riot.
I was going to say the best place probably is if you go to happiful.com. We've got all of our articles on there, more about the magazine as well, if that's of interest. And yeah, all of our different directories. The ones that your listeners will probably be most interested in is Counselling directory and Hypnotherapy directory as well, maybe. But yeah, I would say head there and just, it's an amazing platform that's trying to do so much good, and I've only scratched the surface of what we do here, but hopefully it's been an interesting listen.
But Kat, I think what you've been able to do will have been so helpful and so insightful for people, and I think what you do brilliantly, going all the way back to our conversation, we talked about the generosity that comes through the Happiful range, and I think you embody that yourself, and I think what you've done has been really generous in sharing so much insight and knowledge and tips, that people can follow, as well as, being generous to share with us, some of your own lived experience. That's really stood out. So what a great ambassador you are for Happiful anyway.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much to Kat for joining us today, and thank you for listening in. This podcast is brought to you by the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, a professional home for counsellors, psychotherapists, and over 120 wellbeing organisations across the UK. Autonomy, diversity, creativity, and community are at the heart of what we do. We're creating a positive space for conversations with people who share common beliefs and goals, because together, our voice is louder. If you would like to know more about the NCPS, please visit www.ncps.com for more information. And please remember to follow and subscribe to this podcast so you're always part of the conversation.